Welcome to WCG Talks Trials, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of clinical research, sharing the latest trends, insights, and best practices from experts across the industry. In each episode of WCG Talks Trials, we'll explore a different area of the clinical trial industry, while featuring a diverse range of clinical research and medical professionals. If you're passionate about advancing clinical research, improving patient outcomes, and driving healthcare forward, then WCG Talks Trials is the right podcast for you. We are so glad you could join us today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jill Johnston, the Chief Innovation Officer at WCG. I'm thrilled to be your host for today's episode of WCG Talks Trials, where we will be discussing Florence Healthcare's Research Revolution event and talking more about the importance of site enablement in clinical research. Before we dive in, let me remind you to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on your favorite listening platforms like Apple Podcasts and Spotify, so you never miss an episode of WCG Talks Trials. Today, we're joined by Catherine Gregor, the Chief Clinical Trial Officer at Florence Healthcare, and Sandy Smith, the Senior Vice President of Clinical Solutions and Strategic Partnering here at WCG. Thank you both for joining us today. Before we get started, we'll like to start all conversations off by getting to know our guest a little bit more. So our first question today is, how did you come to join the clinical research industry? Kat, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I would like to tell this story because hopefully the story changes in the future. But like a lot of people, clinical research wasn't my first career choice. I'm a liberal arts major. I had a vision of myself working in a museum. And then I found out that doesn't make any money. And I happened to meet an investigator who was looking for some assistance. And I followed him into clinic one day and never turned back. Started as a research coordinator, did clinical care, data abstraction, budgets, contracts, regulatory, all the things. And so for the last 20 years, that's what I've been doing for lots of different types of trials.
Thanks, Kat. It's so interesting to figure out where people had come from in the past and how they got involved in this industry. Sandy, how about you?
Yeah, my pathway is a little different than Kat's. I'm an advanced practice oncology nurse by training and have worked in cancer care for a lot of my clinical career. And in cancer care, clinical trials and clinical care intersect. So that has always been a treatment option for cancer patients from the time I became a nurse. Set up IRBs and research programs in some hospitals that I had worked at. And then eventually when the opportunity came to work in clinical trials full time, I embraced it. To me, there's this benefit of being able to contribute in a collective way with others to advancing the science. And then as a nurse, always having the patient at the center of what we do. So I could really support that career direction that I took many, many years ago.
Yeah, I definitely look up to both of you ladies for what you've done for the industry and how you've engaged with all of our sites and sponsors. So thank you to you both for sustaining this longer career. I really appreciate it. So let's kick us off. Can you provide our listeners with an overview of this year's Research Revolution event, including maybe what the primary focus and goals were for the event?
Sure. So Research Revolution is our annual conference that Florence decided to put on starting last year. So this is the second time we've done it. And the idea really came from this concept of trying to bring all the stakeholders in the industry together to talk about common problems. We found that a lot of times on the conference circuit, there's a heavy weight towards sponsors talking to sponsors or sites talking to sites. And what we really wanted to do is get the two talking to each other, because that's how we're really going to start to see change. So that is the heart of Research Revolution, is to bring sites, CROs, and sponsors and a little bit of patient advocacy into it together to talk about what are we doing and what do we need to do to make the industry move forward in this new technology space. And then this year in particular, we were focusing on access, driving access, creating connection in new ways than we've seen done in the past. The biggest thing for Research Revolution is how do we drive access across all sites, no matter where they are or what kind of technology they have. And some of that will come with people and process, and some of it comes with innovation and technology. So that was really the big theme, driving through connectivity, intelligence, transparency, and ultimately moving towards efficacy and speed.
Yeah, Kat, it was such a great theme this year. I love the frontier, and it was like we were part of a national park, and there was campfire. And I really felt like that set the stage because we're really comfortable and in that setting, talking around the campfire and really trying to engage with our colleagues around the industry. So I think it was really well done.
Excellent. That was 100% our marketing team. So I applaud them and their work. The concept was frontier for frontier sites, right? Like those new sites that are out there, how do we access them? And then it had very much a camping theme. Last year, we had a conversational thing where we brought a lot of setup where we had space for people to connect and sit down and talk and engage in different ways. And this year was much more of like, it's summer camp. We're all at summer camp trying to figure out how we're going to make new things together.
Yeah, that was great. It was really well done. So we'll talk a little bit maybe about site enablement. I'll ask you both, what do we mean by site enablement and what does good site enablement look like? Sandy, maybe we'll go to you first and then Kat, it would be great to hear from your perspective.
Yeah, Jill and Kat, when I think of site enablement, I think of primarily two things. One is connectivity with all of the stakeholders that you're working with. And then building on that connectivity, there's also predictability. So in running a clinical trials office, you can plan how many clinical trials you plan to do. You have predictable workflows that then lead to predictable results and allowing for everyone's desire to participate in clinical trials, do it efficiently, do it effectively, meet your endpoint goals. And again, most of all, bringing clinical trials to those individuals that need it most.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Sandy. And building on that a little bit, I think for us, it is site enablement is 100% around connectivity and allowing sponsors and sites to connect and share data. Ultimately, to connect to the patients is the end goal, right? We know that sites are where patients and sponsors meet. So how do we drive that connection and then make this data flow feel seamless so that the sites are able to focus on what they need to do, which is patient care, but the sponsor still gets the data transparency that they need to evaluate their molecules and their therapies. So for us, we talk about it as allowing sites to do their best work and operate at the highest end of their licensure, right? Like I don't want my coordinators or my nurses focused on how to manually enter data from one system into another. I want them focused on a patient. That's where high value work is. And it's where the most impactful work is. So how do we keep them there and still allow that data to flow? And I think that comes from flexibility. And that is the definition of site enablement in my mind.
Yeah, I go in and pulling from a term that I had in my Six Sigma, it's the value add, right? You want the value add steps in there and get rid of all that waste, right? So with that said, we've all did the conference circuit this fall. It was a heavy one. It was very well attended. And it was so good to see both of you at so many events. We hear the similar themes going from one conference to the other. But so every year we end up hearing that. What do you think is standing in the way of good site enablement? What does good look like? And what are the challenges that we're perennially having to overcome? Kat, what are your thoughts there?
I think that some of the barrier to moving forward is that everybody agrees we want a solution, but we want our solution, right? So sponsors want it one way, sites want it another, and rarely do the two meet in the middle. And that's the problem, right? We've got to find an answer that meets both stakeholder needs. And there's never going to be one answer. That's the other key to it, right? So we're going to have flexible options. And flexibility equates to variability in a research mindset, which we're trained to be very skeptical of, right? If we're not all the same system or we're not all doing things 100% the same way, how good is the data? And we as an industry have to get comfortable with flexibility and variability and that it doesn't undermine safety and efficacy. And I think the agency is pointing towards that. Some of the other guidance industries are pointing towards that in an effort to get us out of our own way and be able to accept that there will be multiple solutions to a problem. And we've got to be able to operate in that space.
Sandy, your thoughts?
Yeah. And I think along those lines, you always hear every site say, we have a special way of doing things. And I think there can be a regard for special ways of doing things, but using whether it's technology workflows that are so highly customized where we can't pick out some of the basics and somewhat agree at many, many sites, that's how we're going to do things. So I think if we could get back to some key fundamentals of standardization and to Kat's point, there has to be flexibility. There has to be acceptance that there are going to be multiple ways of doing things. But if we could get to some basics on how things should flow and come to an agreement there, I think we'll be in a better place. And one of my takeaways from the conference was something that Ryan Jones said about innovation is fantastic, right? We all believe that. However, if we step back a little bit and look at what we have and optimize the use of that, rather than getting caught up on what's the next best thing, I think we lose a lot of time and energy by thinking that there's something better out there that we should adopt. So how can we be very strategic, optimize what we have in front of us, establish those workflows, find workflows that interconnect with the other stakeholders in the ecosystem so that, again, as a whole, we can push the conduct of clinical trials forward as well as accelerating them.
Yeah, 100%. If chopping in on that a little bit more, I feel like it's even more crucial that we do that right now because we just came out of a really disruptive period in our industry, right? COVID turned everything on its head and it opened up a lot of space for innovation, and we got real creative, real fast and at a very large scale. And now we're on the other side of that and sites are taxed out, right? The staff can't keep up. We have too much tech at the table. And then that means that it's easier to move away from the tech than to figure out how to optimize it. And we've got to not let that happen. We have to stay moving forward and take some time to focus in on creating the foundation so that we'll be more successful the next time we find the next shiny object.
Well, great. Let's get back to talk about the Florence Research Revolution. I'd like to ask you a couple questions about your experience at the event. What current challenges were highlighted during the event, and what were some of the solutions that were proposed to solve some of those challenges? There were so many great breakout sessions, I think, that we were all part of. Kat, maybe I'll start with you. What were some of the key takeaway challenges that were highlighted and some of the solutions?
I think my favorite thing is always around integration and the concept of creating an ecosystem versus a platform. We talk about that there's a lot of tech and the data transfer is duplicative and it slows us down and it breaks and it doesn't work. And the traditional answer has always been platform. And platform doesn't really play. Like you said, it was like Sandy pointed out, there's multiple sites and then there's multiple sponsors and each of them has their own way of working. So in order for us to really create momentum around technology, it's got to focus on integration and it's got to be vendor agnostic integration. It can't just be, you can only buy my suite of products. We found that repeated over and over again by a lot of the sites. And then some of the solution conversations we had around that about how do we connect between partners and reduce work, but drive value. There was a real interest in the group about how do we create those integrations that are scalable. And then the other one I heard a lot about was around community access and what it takes to be in the community. We know that we need different types of sites. We know we need different types of staff. We also know that it takes people being in the community well before the need for a clinical trial arises. So we saw some movement around how do we fund those programs? How do we stand them up so that our communities are ready and engaged for us to recruit later rather than us having to go out and have this conversation about this is what your health condition is. This is what a clinical trial is. And oh, by the way, do you want to join my study? Right. That timeline has to be more spread out.
I want to just push on that a little bit because I think I heard it as well at the event. And it always comes down to funding, right? So many studies are funded for the study. And they go from budget to budget to budget, but there's typically not a lot of funding between trials unless organization is gearing up for market access or their late stage clinical trials where they might be developing a registry and engaging. So did anybody talk? I mean, you had a great cross representation from the industry. Did they talk about funding solutions there?
Absolutely. There was some conversation about it in one of the breakout groups that I led in particular, where we talked about that the funding sources, you're right, on a study by study recruitment basis, it's not enough and it's timed to when you actually need to talk to the patients. But there's whole other programs within sponsor and CRO communities that are tied to this work that are separate from ClinOps and study management. And so we were talking about redirecting the site resources to ask for funds from those groups and not your traditional study budget monitor relationship. And then also talking about the funding that's coming from government agencies that know that this is an issue. The mandates are being handed down by the FDA and Congress and FDORA and those pieces that really this is the time to capitalize on that, and that you've got to not be shy and don't continue to go the traditional path. You've got to talk to your MSLs. You've got to look at online for the funding or recruitment programs. And they pretty much the majority of the time are going to exist outside of the clinical operations team.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Sandy, how about from you? What challenges did you hear and solutions that were offered?
I think there is overall a sense that people are willing to think about new ways of doing things, not necessarily stuck in the way they had done them before. As Kat said, we've lived through this very disruptive period of time. I think initially the solution was, let's go back and rebuild things the way we've done them before. For many sites that didn't work, the ongoing issues with resources at sites, having an oversupply of trials, now new issues like physician engagement and availability that's popping up. So I think overall there is an openness to trying new ways. I think there's a lot more listening going on. And that's one thing I really enjoy about the Florence Research Revolution is the way the agenda structure really intentionally allows a lot of networking time so people can share ideas, build upon them, listen to what others are doing beyond what's being presented on stage or in the breakout sessions. And again, we've heard this for a long time, but I think there's a bit of a crescendo rising again in terms of the participant voice and how that really is factored into how trials are designed, to how we recruit, how we conduct those trials. And I think most importantly, communicating results back to those individuals who participated or their family members. So again, I think the big challenge remains is resources and people, and this whole idea of how can we make clinical research an intentional option, career for people. I hear a lot of discussions in that place as well, and hoping that we can continue not only the discussions, but seeing actions come out from that as well.
Yeah, really great insight. I'll just add one other thing was very apparent when I was sitting through some of the sessions. It's almost some of the sites were asking and reaching out for help and advice, almost looking for support to get courage to tell the sponsors and CROs what they actually need. They were so tentative, some of them, in some of the questions that they asked to say, am I allowed to ask for this? Am I allowed to talk to the sponsor or CRO for this? And it was like everyone in the room who was a site is like, absolutely, yeah. Like, you should do that. And, I've heard that throughout this fall season that people are looking for guidance and the ability to have courage to say, what does normal look like? And there is no necessarily quote unquote normal, but there's different approaches. And I think the mentoring is probably so apparent when people get together face to face like this with their colleagues and peers and have the ability to talk face to face with a sponsor that usually is just a name on a piece of paper, but to have a cup of coffee with someone that is giving them advice on that probably allows them to go back to their day-to-day work and have a little bit more courage on how to engage in this industry. I just thought that was very apparent. I just wonder how many other people are out there who don't typically get to go to a industry conference like this, who are probably wondering the same thing. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for encouragement and courage for folks to talk about their challenges and how to overcome them as well, which I thought was really nice within the breakout session.
Yeah. And Jill, you mentioning courage. I think we would all be remiss if we didn't acknowledge the presentation by the Merck representative that was in Ukraine and everything that they endured, but clinical trials kept moving forward. Talk about courage, talk about endurance, talk about innovation. It was all captured in that presentation. Just so inspiring.
Yeah, thank you for calling that out. We were very fortunate to be able to help with that situation as with WCG, and being able to allow patients to continue to have access to care in really disruptive times is gratifying, and it makes the work we do feel great. But also we have to acknowledge Merck as a sponsor took a position that they were going to be flexible and they were going to do what was needed to be done because the patients came first. And I think that is a great example of figuring out, like, how do we allow the sites to do what they need to do, which is take care of their patients, and in the Ukraine, take care of themselves, which is very challenging. And Jill, to your point about sites having courage to speak up and ask, 100%, right? That is the one thing that I learned moving from small community research center to large academic center is talking to my partners, both my other sites and my industry partners across the table and saying, can I do this? Wait, but why, right? Like, why haven't I asked in the past? And finding out that the worst thing they're going to say is no. They're not going to be like, you can't have this study anymore, you silly person. You ask these silly questions. They'll just say, no, we're not going to do that, but we can do this. And so never be afraid to ask, because you'll be surprised what you're leaving on the table when you don't ask. That most people are really there to help and they don't even know that there's an issue unless you phrase it to them. Now more than ever, it's important that we raise our hands because we have so much opportunity to really change how we are functioning and get healthier about how we're functioning as an industry. And if we don't ask those hard questions now, it's gonna stop us from doing what we ultimately want to do.
Absolutely. I think it's great insight. So next question I have for you, what emerging trends were presented during the event that you could think could potentially revolutionize clinical research? What things were talked about that would be pretty interesting for us to talk about today?
Well, I'm still super biased and I will just acknowledge the bias. The integration is my biggest soapbox that I stand on. I stood on it when I was at a site and I love that I get to stand on it here at Florence. Is that we as an industry have to figure out data transfer and not put it on the sites and the patients to figure it out for us. The vendors have to get together. We have to make this happen. Other industries have figured it out. You look at banking, you don't think when you change banks, like, oh no, I'm going to have to manually reenter all this information. The information just goes with you. And healthcare and research remains technologically fragmented, and we've got to change that, which means there has to be a way. There has to be an emphasis on the vendors to do that independently without an immediate financial reward, which makes everybody be like, ooh, ROI.
Like it's an information exchange, right? I mean, it's like everybody needs to agree on that. I agree, Kat. Really great insight there. Sandy, how about for you?
Yeah, and just to follow that theme, it's no one organization or person has the complete solution. We're going to have to work together to figure out how all of these parts fit together and optimize it from there. But yeah, bringing it all together to find the streamlined effects. I think we didn't talk about it a lot at the Research Revolution, but clearly it's been in the conference world about where artificial intelligence, fits in all of this as well, which kind of goes hand in hand with the data issue that Catherine raised.
Yeah, I think Florence has been so open to partnering with a number of organizations for that specific reason, right? Information exchange and so forth. Are you starting to see that there's a momentum growing in that direction? People are desiring to do that. Or are you starting to see some of the ones that were older organizations still kind of be in their way of trying to just, hey, we're not going to integrate. Everybody needs to be on our platform. Can you talk a little bit about how you're seeing the transition of the industry on that?
Yeah, I think there's still a mix. I think there's definitely some big players who want to continue to push the platform route. But even with those groups, I'm seeing a bit of a shift in understanding that they have to partner, at least on the sponsor side, with different options if they're going to continue to drive value across the site side. So exploring a little bit more openness around their integration posture, but relatively still pretty static, stay on all of our systems. In the groups that I talk to and the people I talk to, I'm seeing a lot of, we've got to figure this out. So let's do what's in the best interest of our mutual customers. And the tech partner program that Florence launched this year, where we announced 5 integrations at Research Revolution, started off as just an idea. Let's just walk around and see who's interested in participating and might want to partner. And we were pleasantly surprised by the amount of interest we got from other partners like WCG and UDU and Slope and Greenfire. And everybody is starting to come together and say, let's just see what happens. Let's just build it and see what happens. What's the worst thing we do? Put a little bit of investment up front and it doesn't, nobody buys it, but it's what the industry needs. So let's give it a shot. And we've got pretty good traction within 4 months and we're able to talk about 5 real integrations. So that's exciting.
Yeah, no, it's really exciting. So we're headed into December, the end of the year. It's always a time for reflection on the year and also a time to think about what's going to happen go forward. Look into your crystal ball a little bit. What do you think 2024 brings for new innovation, new ideas? Where do you see us a year from now? Kat, I'll let you go first on that.
From my seat, I think AI is going to continue to be a big buzzword. How can we use AI to solve problems? And I think my one caution is I hope that we use AI to solve the simple problems and don't go headlong at the hard ones, right? There's a lot of talk about patient matching and trial design and things like that and real world data and control groups. Those are exciting problems, but there's still a lot of really small ones. Like, how do I make sure my documents match between my contract, my consent, and the protocol? How do I understand what that footnote on page 55, which actually impacts this patient visit, says in real time when I have a patient in front of me? Those are the small problems where I think AI has a lot of potential to make big movement. And I hope that people look at the full spectrum of problems that AI can solve and not just the big ones.
Yeah. Great. Sandy, how about for you?
Yeah, I think visionary, optimal use of data, use of AI are out there. But I do think through 2024, particularly from a site side, we're going to still work on some of the fundamentals. Training periods are still taking very long time for new hires at sites. Healthcare resignations have finally peaked and we're seeing them begin to decline. We're also hearing many sites say they do have all their positions filled or maybe just a few open. Unfortunately, there still seems to be turnover that's occurring, but it's less severe than it was before. I think working on optimal workflows, I certainly enjoy the opportunity to partner with organizations where we can help relieve some of the administrative burden that they have. We're awaiting the single IRB mandate to go through, which that also should help facilitate some of the delays that occur with the multiple IRB reviews that are going on when central IRBs are not being used. So I just think that there's still going to be a fair amount of blocking and tackling that's taking place with the fundamentals while we're looking for some of those big innovative opportunities ahead of us.
Great. Thank you so much. Were there any other personal highlights from the event that you guys wanted to talk about? Any moments that particularly resonated with you?
I wanted to talk a little bit about the workforce development conversations that we had on stage with a couple of partners, one of which is ACRP. I think a lot of the conversations around workforce recognition and defining what is clinical research to the rest of the world is really important. It's important for us for career growth and retention and value, but it's also important for recruitment of the next generation staff. I started off the story by talking about that I didn't really know what clinical research was, and I found it and I fell in love with it. Imagine what the workforce would look like if we were talking about it in schools, right? In elementary and STEM programs in college. This is a viable career option. And FYI, it's not always a clinical role, right? Sometimes it's data epidemiology. Sometimes it's regulatory. There are many different faces to this industry. And I think that a lot of the work that our groups like ACRP and SOBRA are focusing on is really creating more visibility into this workforce and the unique positions we have in the industry as a career option.
Great. Thank you. Sandy?
Yeah, and for me, the ongoing discussions on decentralized, or like I prefer to refer to them as hybrid trials, they're continuing to move forward, believing that the access to participants will be much more available to them, as well as the diversity, equity, and inclusion aspects of it. So maybe not as much of a focus as we've heard before, but it's still there, still necessary, and moving that forward.
Great. Well, thank you both for these great insights. It was a really fabulous event. Thank you to Florence for allowing WCG to participate in it. Before we wrap up, I wanted to turn it back over to you, Kat, and ask, what are some of the upcoming innovations or advancements that Florence Healthcare is working on right now that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, thank you for that. We are very excited about this partner ecosystem play. We're going to continue to develop that and add to it over the next 12 months. We're also really excited to talk about site enablement platform, allowing sponsors and sites to connect no matter which system they're using. Really putting our money where our mouth is around. We understand not every site is going to be on Florence for eBinders. They might be on some of our competitors and they might be on paper, and we still have to enable that connection. So we're rolling out a feature function that's going to allow sponsors to connect and have data transfer from a site no matter what platform they're using. And I think that's going to be a game changer for us. And hopefully it'll be a game changer for sites. And then we are also playing with AI to address some of those lower end problems that I was talking about. How can we make that work more seamless and less burdensome for the staff who are on site?
Great. That sounds really exciting. I'm looking forward to next year's Research Revolution, see what you've accomplished this coming year. I know I speak for everyone at WCG when I say that we're excited for our partnership with Florence. We can't wait to see what 2024 has in store for all of us. Thank you so much to Catherine Gregor and Sandy Smith for joining us today. And thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in. We hope you found this episode insightful and that you will join us next time for future episodes. Bye for now.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of WCG Talks Trials. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on your preferred listening platform as we continue to explore different areas of the clinical research industry. As always, we encourage you to join in the conversation. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future topics you'd like to hear on the show by visiting us at wcgclinical.com/podcast. We're here to serve as a trusted resource as we work to improve lives and accelerate clinical research together.